What's going on, everyone? I'm Travis Brown alongside the man, Jay Arnold, former Texas A&M defensive lineman and our analyst for this season on all things Texas A&M football when it comes to the X's and O's and what it's like to play college football. Jay, how's it going, buddy?
It is going excellent. It was a good, productive weekend and excited to talk some Aggie football with you.
Of course. Well, we'll start with there. I believe you were down in Houston at the Rice game. How was that
I
atmosphere?
was. It was a good time. You know, it was a big matchup for Rice, right? Like this was a pretty good test. They were, I think, 11-point underdogs. Vegas had them going into this game, and then it was a great performance for that Rice Owls team. But I had a good time tailgating outside the stadium beforehand. Joined up with some former Rice players, and they kind of took me under their wings, no pun intended, being Rice Owls. But it was a good time, and of course, I was checking scores the whole time I was in the stands. But great performance by Rice, and a big win for them, beating one of the teams that's been one of the better squads in the Group of Five in the last few years.
Yeah, did they I didn't get to see any of that game. Did they wear their spaceman uniforms?
No, so it wasn't I think the Spaceman uniforms were last week.
Gotcha.
The ones they wore this week did have kind of a throwback owl logo on the helmet, though.
That's
It's
pretty
kind of
sweet.
nice. Yeah.
Pretty sweet. Well, let's get into the A&M game here. And I want to start with kind of a point of conversation with a lot of people, and that is the fact that DJ Durkin this year, A&M's base defense, of course, is a four-man front, but at times he's gone with a three-man front, added an extra a DB in there, like a little bit more of a dime look from their normal kind of nickel look. With the difficulties that A&M has had at times getting a pass rush and especially against run blocking. Why do you think DJ Durkin is going with this little bit of a wrinkle, and what's the pros and cons of those two different fronts?
Yeah, I mean, so I haven't been in the strategy, the war room. They haven't seen fit to bring me in there to kind of give me the game plan for this. But I mean, generally speaking, when you go to a three-man front, there's a few different things, and a lot of people are running three-man fronts nowadays, and it could be a mixed bag. You could see a 3-3-5. You could see the 3-2-6, the dime package that you mentioned. But generally speaking, it's used more to stop the pass, especially in the modern age with so many spread offenses. You don't want to have as many big guys out there, and especially in your later downs, if you get a long down and distance, second and long, or if it's third and obvious passing situations, you see a lot of people go to the three-man front. But this Miami team, I think going into the game, the story of the team was Tyler Van Dyke throwing the ball. I think that's what a lot of people expected to see out of Miami. And you know, hats off to A&M. They were able to limit Van Dyke somewhat. 50% completion percentage on the day, and 5.3 yards per pass attempt. That's not terrible, I guess, but the running, the defense really did struggle in the running game, and you have to wonder if the three-man front was a big part of that.
Yeah. From your perspective, do you think with the team that does kind of struggle with the run, sticking with the four-man fronts is a little bit better to go? I know it's a little situational, and that's a little bit of an overly general question, but what's kind of your take on that?
I'm honestly, I mean, it's tough for me. I would prefer to see a four-man front. I just think that gives you more options up front. I see why Durkin may have switched to that three-man. I mean, and especially if you're bringing in, especially like a guy in Antonio Johnson, getting him involved in blitzes, like you're still going to have multiple pass rushers, and at times A&M was able to get pressure on Tyler Van Dyke by bringing those blitzes. It can make you a little bit less predictable, but for me personally, especially if you're struggling against the run, I would rather stick with a four-man front.
Yeah, and it is something to mention. I know in the Sam Houston game, Damani Richardson was on that blitz a few times when they were in the 3-man front and was able to disrupt the quarterback, I believe twice in that game. And you go back to when Mike Elko was here on 3rd and long situations, he'd run that kind of dime package as well with a 3-man front. So it's not something super necessarily novel to these last couple of games, but it's something that has stuck out because of a little bit of that run defense. Let's put a pin in the defense a little bit. Let's go back to the other big storyline, and that is the quarterback change. What'd you see from Max Johnson in this game?
Yeah, so I mean, statistically speaking, there's not a lot of change, I guess, in the production from the quarterback position. Uh, Max Johnson was 10 for 20, 140 yards and 1 touchdown. Statistically, none of that jumps out as a huge improvement over Haynes King. But uh, I just kind of liked Max's comfort level. It seemed like he was making decisions at the correct time. I mean, he did a good job running the ball. I honestly, like, weird to say considering that I think Haynes King is probably the better or the faster athlete. I think Max Johnson almost looked more natural running the ball at times. Uh, so the run game is still going to have to be the thing that gets this offense moving, I think. And Devon Achane looked good running the ball, better than I think this offense had been in the past. But I mean, the key thing for me was Max Johnson wasn't missing the really, really easy throws. And I think there was a couple of those that Haynes had last week where he missed that could have gone for big plays or touchdowns. And it seemed like Max, anytime he had an opportunity, he'd take what the defense gave him. And so we'll see kind of how that progresses next week against Arkansas. And into the SEC schedule. But I think Max is probably going to be the starter going forward. I don't see, unless something, injury wise, something like that happens. I don't see Max giving up that starting position now.
Yeah, and for me, the thing that stood out to me, and I mentioned it a couple of times, is his ability to move around in the pocket and that kind of awareness of what's happening with the rush, having that kind of awareness of pressure, and was able to step up sometimes, step to the side, deliver the throws, a lot of poise in there. So yeah, I agree. I think there was a comfort level there with Max Johnson and his experience back there. In front of him, though, he still was having to battle with an offensive line that still is having some trouble finding some continuity. A little bit better on the right side in the run, but what was the offensive line looking like to you?
Yeah, I mean, it was a mixed bag. There were times where the offensive line was generating push, and there were times where the offensive line was getting shoved back in the backfield. And if guys are coming on pulls, like if you're running a power counter and guys are getting shoved back, the pulling guards can't get around to block the tight end or the block the linebackers or whatever the situation is. It kind of blew up the play a few times in the backfield. And there was a couple of times where I think Ruben Fathery struggled a little bit on the outside with kind of reaching and leaning, and their defensive line was able to take care of that for Miami, or take advantage of that. But we did get Bryce Foster back at center, and I think that helped quite a bit. Some of that continuity from last year that we talked about. Obviously, I mean, from a physical presence, Bryce Foster is a very, very strong athlete as well. And there was a couple times where I kind of saw that in play from the center position. And, maybe that's part of why they struggled early on, maybe not. But I do think getting Foster back was a boon for this offensive line.
A lot of people always talk about when you talk about the center position, the center makes the calls for the offensive line and is kind of that anchor in communication. I know you were a defensive lineman, but trench brethren, what kind of calls is he? What does that mean for a center, generally speaking, that he can have that kind of impact and communication with the other offensive linemen?
Yeah, so I mean, in a run play, you're going to see gap assignments defensively, kind of recognizing what front you're going against, recognizing what responsibilities the linebackers are likely to have, because that gives you an idea of as an offensive lineman what you're looking for when you work up to the second level. Whenever if you're working a double team, which offensive lineman is going to come off that double to the linebacker whenever you get to the second level. So those things are all important pre-snap. And then if it's in the pass game, recognizing blitzes, uh, you know, it's seeing the depth of a defensive lineman if there's a hint of a twist or a stunt going on. These are all things that the center can recognize pre-snap and relay that information to his offensive line group. So that's something that, you know, more experience in game is definitely helpful on. And obviously Foster last year getting some of that valuable experience, I think is something that's invaluable as far as whenever he's back on the game.
For sure. A lot of talk about what Max Johnson was able to do in the game, what the defense was able to do in the game, at least keeping points off the board. But a lot of the weight of that win fell on the shoulders of the special teams. What did you like, and what did you see in there that was helping them add that phase in to help secure the win?
Well, if your offense is struggling to sustain drives, you better have a good punter. And I think A&M and Nick Constantino he was the SEC special teams player of the week for a reason, right? I mean, he did a fantastic job punting the ball. Obviously, one of those led to a turnover and a touchdown, and that was more of a mistake on Miami's part with the muffed punt. But constantly, you know, flipping the field and getting A&M good field position, making Miami go the length of the field when they had the ball on offense. And then one of the big plays as well was a blocked field goal. And you know, there's three phases of the game. A lot of times special teams gets left out when people talk about offense and defense, but there's three phases to the game, and the special teams were really important for A&M to win this game. And you know, I look at Constantino and the blocked field goal by, I think Albert Regis was the one that ended up getting that. But those were the two key plays, and then one that almost went poorly for A&M when Anaya Smith in the fourth quarter nearly had had the ball get away from him. He was fortunately able to recover it, but key moments like that can make or break a game, especially in a close battle like this one.
For sure. And we talked to Albert Regis today, got a little bit of his perspective on blocking. He blocked that kick, and earlier in that drive, he also knocked down a pass that set up that field goal attempt. As a defensive lineman, you know, a lot of people are thinking it is talk about being down in the dirt, being physical, you know, getting through the line, but knocking down passes, getting hands on balls is a big part of that too. What does a defensive lineman have to do to add that kind of ability, that kind of vision into his game to be able to make the plays like he was making, to have that wherewithal?
Yeah. So for as far as rushing the passer and getting your hands up, that's something that you have to work on. Like we talk about how quarterbacks have to have an internal clock. As a defensive lineman rushing the passer, you have to have an internal clock as well and be able to get your hands up whenever the quarterback's going to release. And Regis, like you mentioned, did a great job of that, knocking down a pass to help limit Miami to a field goal attempt on that drive. And that's something that you also drill in practice. You know, there's only going to be a certain amount of time for you to rush the passer. So you have to be ready to kind of disengage from your offensive lineman and get those hands up in order to create another barrier for the quarterback to throw around. And then for field goal, a lot of times with that is, and I didn't see exactly how Regis kind of got through. It looked like they were kind of more centrally located, and I'm assuming since he's a defensive tackle, that's the case. You'll usually have a few choke points along the line that you practice blocking field goals at. And generally speaking, one of the offensive linemen in the middle gets circled, and then on the edge, you'll have the rusher trying to kind of basically beat the edge blocker and dive to make that block on the field goal unit. But in this case, it looked like they were able to kind of power through the middle part of the offensive line. We just got his hand up and they were able to block the kick, and it was a huge moment for the Aggies.
Sure. So moving back to the defensive side of the ball, A&M's defense, I don't think you could give them a full A grade, even though they only limited Miami to 9 points, because Miami put up a lot of yards in that game, and at times were kind of kept the Aggie defense on the field, not too dissimilar to what App State did. But they did only put 9 points on the board, and that helped them win the game. How do you kind of rate that whole defensive effort as a whole when you kind of compare and contrast those two very differing outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to give it a B plus is what I would grade that effort as. Miami still had 175 yards rushing. You know, their top two running backs were both averaging over 5 yards a carry. That's not what you want defensively. But on the flip side, in the back end, there were some things that I was really impressed with. And I mean, to be fair, going into the season, I think we all assumed that the back end would be the strength of this unit, given the experience levels back there. But what was maybe more surprising to me is Jalen Jones, after missing so much time, came back strong. And then after Damani Richardson was ejected for targeting, it was Bryce Anderson stepping up back there, who also had a fantastic game. And this goes back to the depth and why recruiting is such a big deal in college football, because you want to make sure that guys are ready to contribute early, even if you know, you want to have experienced guys, but guys need to be ready to contribute early in case things like this happen with targeting. And two guys on the defense, Brian George and Damani Richardson, both ended up getting ejected due to targeting calls. So you never know what's going to happen in those games, but you have to give a tip of the hat to the guys that stepped up and were able to fill those holes in the defense and limit a talented Miami offense to just 9 points.
And I believe both Jalen Jones and Bryce Anderson finished 1 and 2 as far as tackling total tackles went on the team in the game. You make a point and bring up there the two targeting ejections that happened in the first quarter. I think from the replay perspective, it was pretty textbook targeting on both of them. So, and I know as a defensive lineman, it's not necessarily always, maybe when you're getting in on the getting in on the quarterback, trying to get a sack, it comes into play. But I know that the conversation is, how is this guy who's going full speed, trying to make a form tackle and do it the right way? How do you make that adjustment to try to avoid doing that? It just seems like an impossible feat, something impossible to ask of a guy in that situation.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, and this isn't a situation where I think the textbook targeting call that I picture, that obviously the guy made a dumb play, was, I can't remember who it was, from LSU against Florida State in the first game of the year, but there was an event where they were rushing the passer and he launched at the head. It's the launch at the head that is, I think, a more flagrant version of targeting. Both of those examples that I saw for Texas A&M were targeting. I mean, you hit head to head, crown of the helmet. It's so tough to make that adjustment, especially because Miami players are going to lower themselves to get ready for a hit too. And I think in Brian George's case, the guy was kind of already being tackled, and that's part of why the level of his helmet was lowered. But it's just, you got to see what you hit, and if it's a situation where it looks like it's going to be head to head, I mean, I guess the only thing you can do is kind of pull up a little bit, but it is a very tough situation. I do not envy the guys playing under the current targeting restrictions.
For sure. So A&M heads up to Arkansas this weekend, the Southwest Classic. First off, people can talk back and forth. I, not having a stake in this game, see this as a rivalry game, because the intensity always builds up. The fan bases like to chirp at each other. There's those historical ties. There's a lot, the Arkansas players last year said that was the most meaningful trophy game that they won, because they won all three last season. Kind of what's your thought on that? You've played in this series. Do you feel like that intensity is a little bit hyped up. Why on the field does this always seem like it's one of those games that throw the records out the window because it's probably going to be a wild close one?
Yeah, I'm not sure. But it always has been one of those games. It's just, it seems like no matter who the better team is, it's always close. The game comes down, there was a couple of years where Arkansas wasn't that great when A&M was playing them, and Arkansas still played A&M extremely tough. I mean, there's definitely some animosity there, and Arkansas does recruit Texas. You get some Texas kids up there, and there's not as many Arkansas kids that are coming down to A&M, but it's still a proximity deal, and you see these guys every year. And I think that kind of builds up, and some of that is also with the fans, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some of it's just the fans not liking each other, or and feeling the need to interact. Sometimes the players feed off that, just because some of the trash talk does happen to center on the teams. But I will say one thing that I don't like about this rivalry per se is I really wish we could go back to home and home. I do not like playing in Jerry World at all.
Yeah, that's what I was actually gonna be my next question. I know there was the one game in the middle of that early on that was played in Fayetteville. Did you ever play this game, or was it part of the team in AT&T Stadium?
So 2014, we played at AT&T Stadium.
Okay. What I definitely know your arguments towards playing them on the campus, especially you. I know you love the tailgates and the pomp and the circumstance, but I know that there is players who say, yeah, like I like playing in this game too. Some of that might be the talking points or whatnot, but what are some of the positives from a player standpoint about a game in AT&T Stadium?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you're playing in a pro environment. So if it's going into a stadium like that, it's still a cool experience. For me personally, it was cool once, but I wouldn't want to go back there just because it feels like such a sanitized environment. The thing that I always personally loved about college football, and again, this is just my personal opinion, I loved going on the road and shutting up opposing fans.
Mhm.
Like when we beat Auburn on the road in 2014, that was one of my favorite memories. It is so much fun to go into a hostile environment and shut those fans down a little bit. South Carolina in 2014 was another one where we basically commandeered Sandstorm or made it our own. Just being able to demoralize opposing fans is pretty fun.
Yeah.
And you don't really get that whenever you play in a neutral site game like the game at AT&T Stadium.
That is true. That is true. So looking ahead at that game, pretty good Arkansas team who is really, really good at rushing offense, really, really bad at passing defense. Where do you see are spots that A&M can exploit in that, and where do you like to see A&M improve heading into another week and into SEC play?
So this is a very tough matchup for A&M in my mind, especially our defense against that Arkansas rushing attack. KJ Jefferson is a pleasure to watch. Just not whenever he's going against the team that you're supporting, but he's a violent runner at quarterback, which isn't something that's always common. So it also makes A&M kind of pick their poison in the rushing attack, right? Like it's hard to defend both the running backs and the quarterback, especially when a quarterback's as good of a runner as KJ Jefferson is. So A&M is really going to have to buckle down. I think you'll see a lot less three-man front this week against Arkansas. And then offensively, I mean, just you have to get it going. The yardage isn't going to be enough that A&M has put up so far. I mean, they're going to need to, I think, get like 350, 400 yards of total offense. That's not something they've shown the ability to do yet. You mentioned that, Arkansas struggled in the pass defense, but A&M hasn't been able to throw the ball for a lot of yards this year. I think Arkansas may force them to. I wouldn't be surprised if A&M ended up playing from behind for a lot of this game, and that's going to put a lot of weight on Max Johnson's shoulders. I just want to see him step up and live up to the starting position now that he's going to be the guy.
For sure. And then if you want to talk about their running offense, I think you look at App State, they wanted to control the ball, control time of possession, and that worked for them. I think Miami kind of tried to do the same thing, and it didn't necessarily work out for them as well. It's something that this Arkansas team could definitely probably do with the physicality they have on the line and their running backs. What does the defense need to do to prevent that from happening uh, for another week?
Yeah, it's going to be tough. I mean, I don't. To be honest with you, I don't think A&M is going to be able to completely shut down this rushing attack. I think A&M is probably going to have to rely on the offense to win this game, which is a frightening prospect. If you're an Aggie fan, but what I want to see is just, we talked about it a little bit last week. The defensive line has to shed blocks and keep the linebackers from having to sift through as much traffic. There's still too many times where Miami was getting to the second level without having contact, or just getting basically an arm tackle attempt from the defensive line. The defensive line really has to do a good job of shedding those blocks and creating plays in the backfield, resetting the line of scrimmage. I will say that I think Isaiah Rakes had a couple of moments in this game where he was really able to get penetration, and it caused problems for Miami. So if A&M can get a little bit more of that in this game against Arkansas at AT&T Stadium, I think it'll set up better for the defense. Although I still like, this rushing attack from Arkansas is just not a good matchup for A&M's defense.
For sure. Well, let's close it out the same way we've closed out all of these. Got a lot of people coming up the DFW Metroplex. You know this. You're from up here. You know this spot pretty well. What's your pregame meal this week?
Yeah, so there's two really good spots in DFW that are like 15, 20 minutes from Jerry World Max. Hurtado is going to be the one that's closest in Arlington. That place is going to be packed. They do some fantastic stuff. I mean, birria tacos, birria brisket tacos, the Texas Twinkies, all the stuff that they do over there is fantastic. And then another personal favorite of mine is Zavala's over in Grand Prairie, which is again just like 15 minutes from AT&T Stadium. It's where I got my final Texas Monthly Top 50 stamp. And if you do go to Zavala's, make sure you get some of the fresh tortillas, get some of the smoked beef cheek, and put some of their salsa on it. It is one of my favorite bites in barbecue. I'm sure Joe will be running some specials. I mean, it is definitely worth stopping in. And honestly, if I were you, I'd probably try to go to both places.
There you go. There you go. He knows everything about what's going on the field and everything to fill your stomach. That's Jay Arnold. Jay, thanks again. And thanks y'all for watching. We'll be back with more of this next week to break down that Arkansas game.